Usually, when we talk about building something meant to last, like a skyscraper or a suspension bridge, there's this underlying assumption of objective reality. You have blueprints, you know,
Yeah.
you have math.
Right, yeah. The engineers look at the physics of the load-bearing walls and say, well, this is how we keep the roof from collapsing.
Exactly. Gravity doesn't care about your feelings. It just is. But if you step into the world of modern American higher education, well, our source material today argues that the architects have essentially just thrown out the blueprints.
Yeah, it is a radical shift in how these institutions function. I mean, when structural integrity is brought into question because the new builders decide that objective measures like gravity are just subjective social constructs, the entire foundation begins to crack.
Before we look at where this structural cracking begins, we need to make something crystal clear to you, our listener.
Yes, very important.
The source material we are doing a deep dive into today is Heather McDonald's deeply controversial book, The Diversity Delusion: How Race and Gender Pandering Corrupt the University and Undermine Our Culture.
And we really have to stress that this text contains heavily politically charged viewpoints.
Right. Our job as your guides today is absolutely not to take a side. We are not here to endorse the author's arguments, and we aren't here to condemn them either.
No, our mission is simply to impartially map out the ideas contained in the text. We want you to fully understand the author's perspective and the mechanics of the arguments that are actively shaping some of the most intense cultural debates we see today.
So the roadmap for this deep dive, we are going to explore how McDonald believes higher education shifted away from traditional humanistic learning, how that shift fueled violent campus protests,
And
and
how this ideology isn't just confined to the campus squad anymore. It is actively crossing over into the corporate world and government policy.
right. So let's start with the baseline. To understand how drastically universities have changed, McDonald points to historical figures who faced actual systemic hatred in America, yet held a really profound reverence for the Western canon,
She specifically highlights W.E.B. Du Bois, writing in 1903.
which was, I mean, a demonstrably dark period of racial violence and segregation.
Exactly. It was brutal. Yet Du Bois wrote about his deep intellectual affinity with the Western canon, which is essentially the foundational literature, philosophy, and art of Western culture.
Right.
He viewed these works as a universal toolkit for human thought, not the property of one specific race. He famously wrote, "I sit with Shakespeare and he winces not. Across the color line, I move arm in arm with Balzac and Dumas."
That's such a powerful quote. And she also brings up Frederick Douglass.
Yes, the contrast there is striking.
As a 12-year-old enslaved boy, he discovered this book called The Columbian Orator. It was a collection of political speeches by British Enlightenment thinkers.
And Douglas didn't view those thinkers as his oppressors.
No, he said their words gave tongue to many interesting thoughts he hadn't been able to express about liberty and human rights.
So MacDonald uses Du Bois and Douglas to establish this historical premise, right? The belief that the great works of human history belong to everyone. But she immediately contrasts that historical reverence with a 2016 student petition at Yale University.
Okay, let's unpack this. What exactly happened in 2016?
Well, the students demanded the removal of a core course for English majors, a course that covered foundational authors like Geoffrey Chaucer, Edmund Spenser, and John Milton.
Oh, did they argue the books were irrelevant or just poorly written?
No, not at all. They claimed that reading these specific authors created a, quote, culture especially hostile to students of color.
Oh, wow. So instead of looking at the ideas contained in the text, they were looking purely at the demographic profiles of the authors and just decided their work was inherently toxic.
What's fascinating here is that this is the pivotal shift MacDonald identifies. She argues the university has replaced traditional education with a diversity bureaucracy. And the intellectual tool they used to achieve this was a theory called deconstruction.
Right, deconstruction. That is one of those academic terms that gets thrown around a lot, but is rarely actually explained.
Yeah, it can be pretty dense.
So think of it like taking apart a car engine. But you aren't taking it apart to see how it makes the car run. You're taking it apart to prove the mechanic who built it was secretly trying to trap you.
That is an excellent way to visualize it.
The focus shifts entirely from the usefulness of the text to uncovering hidden power dynamics. It's like replacing the foundational code of a societal operating system simply because the new users don't like the demographic profiles of the original programmers.
Yeah, that's exactly MacDonald's point. She argues that in the 1980s, multiculturalism essentially weaponized this deconstruction. It trains students to stop studying great texts for wisdom and start studying their own perceived victimization.
Right, the whole dead white male taunt.
Exactly. It became the academic justification to completely ignore the historical canon. Students are now taught to define themselves primarily by their race, gender, and sexual preference, and to view themselves as existentially oppressed by Western civilization.
So if a student is taught that classical texts are essentially demographic traps designed to oppress them, what happens when living, breathing people bring non-conforming ideas to campus?
Well, that ideological shift in the classroom clearly doesn't stay theoretical for long. MacDonald details her own physical experience with this at Claremont McKenna College.
Yeah, this part of the book is jarring.
She was invited to speak about another one of her books, The War on Cops. But before she even set foot on campus, student activists had mobilized on Facebook, labeling her a notorious white supremacist fascist.
And the physical reality of what happened when she arrived is just wild. A massive mob of protesters had gathered.
The campus administration actually had to shuttle her to a safe house. It was a guest suite with the blinds fully drawn.
Because protesters physically linked arms and blocked every single entrance to the auditorium.
Right. She ended up having to live stream her speech from an empty, blinded room while the mob was literally pounding on the glass windows outside.
And she ultimately had to be evacuated from the campus kitchen into an unmarked police van just to safely leave the college.
And MacDonald notes this isn't an isolated phenomenon. She details another talk she gave at UCLA titled Blue Lives Matter.
Which didn't go over well, I assume.
Not at all. The audience was incredibly hostile. They responded with screams and gasps when she argued that proactive policing actually saves minority lives.
And she used specific examples, right?
She did. To support her argument, she cited the tragic murders of young Aaron Shannon Jr., who was shot wearing his Spider-Man costume on Halloween, and 9-year-old Tyshawn Lee. Her point was that while activists often ignore this kind of tragic neighborhood violence, the police are the ones actively trying to stop it.
And the crowd's response.
They responded by screaming obscenities at her.
The text outlines a whole pattern of this suppression. It mentions the sociologist Charles Murray at Middlebury College, where the protest was so aggressive that the professor accompanying him was physically assaulted and suffered a concussion.
Yeah, a literal concussion.
And Bret Weinstein at Evergreen State, who had a mob curse and scream at him because he refused to leave campus during a day when white people were asked to absent themselves.
And we can't forget the Black Bloc anarchist riots at UC Berkeley against Milo Yiannopoulos.
Which we should clarify what Black Bloc is. It isn't a specific organization, right?
Right. It's an organized, decentralized tactic. Individuals wear entirely black clothing and face coverings. This allows them to move as an anonymous mob to destroy property or shut down events without easily being identified by law enforcement.
And at Berkeley, this resulted in smashed windows, fires, and assaulted bystanders.
Exactly. It was sheer chaos.
But I'm struggling to bridge a gap here. Let me push back on MacDonald's framing for just a second.
Sure, go ahead.
Isn't protesting a speaker, even loudly, disruptively, and offensively, just a passionate form of free speech? I mean, college kids have always been rowdy. Why does she view this as a terrifying descent into soft totalitarianism rather than just a modern version of the 1960s anti-war protests?
Well, it comes down to how the students are being instructed to view language itself. MacDonald argues that modern faculty are teaching students to equate non-conforming ideas with literal physical violence.
Literal violence.
Yes. If a speaker challenges the campus orthodoxy on race or gender, the students are taught to process those words as an actual physical threat to their bodily safety and their identities.
But surely the administrators and professors know the difference between a controversial opinion and a literal bullet.
You would think so.
Why not just step in, act like adults and say, no, this speaker is going to kill you. Sit down and listen. Why validate the delusion?
Because the institutional incentives have been entirely inverted. If the campus culture has broadly accepted the premise that words equal literal violence, then any administrator who protects free speech is immediately accused of endorsing physical harm against their own students.
Oh, I see.
If you think my speech is literally going to kill you, then you punching a window, pulling a fire alarm, or shutting down my microphone is framed as a totally justifiable survival tactic. It becomes self-defense.
Here's where it gets really interesting. That completely explains the paralysis of the adults in the room.
Exactly.
If an administrator defends the speaker, the administrator becomes an accomplice to the violence, which is exactly what we see happening at the administrative level across the country. Let's look at the University of Missouri in 2015.
The Timothy Wolf situation.
Right. The president was forced to resign because black football players threatened to boycott an upcoming game over alleged systematic oppression on campus.
And McDonald points out the raw financial mechanics at play there. Forfeiting that football game would have cost the university over $1 million in immediate penalties, not to mention the damage to the massive sports industrial complex.
So the president was cornered.
Yeah, he resigned immediately and publicly apologized for his inaction.
But it goes far beyond financial pressure, though. The culture of capitulation is deeply ideological. Take the famous Yale Halloween costume controversy.
Oh, right. Erica Christakis.
Yes, an administrator sent an email gently suggesting that maybe the university bureaucracy didn't need to police students' Halloween costumes, that college students were adults who could handle being slightly offended.
And the response was absolutely explosive. Hundreds of students mobbed her husband, Nicholas Christakis, in the college quad.
There is that notoriously difficult-to-watch video. A student is just screaming at him, demanding to know why he isn't creating a safe space, yelling, "Be quiet." And you are disgusting.
And how did the administration respond? Instead of reprimanding the students for screaming at a faculty member, McDonald details how Yale's president issued fawning declarations of sorrow.
Unbelievable.
He thanked the students for the opportunity to listen and learn from them. The university eventually even awarded the lead protesters a graduation prize for inclusive leadership.
And the same mechanism played out at Emory University. Students claimed they were genuinely in pain and unsafe because someone wrote Trump 2016 in chalk on the campus sidewalks.
Chalk on a sidewalk caused them pain.
Yes, they barged into the administration building, actually quoting the Communist Manifesto. And the president of Emory validated their feelings, promised a formal process to address social justice issues, and reviewed security footage to try and find the people who drew with the chalk.
McDonald pushes back heavily here against a popular theory. You might remember a famous Atlantic article that framed this whole phenomenon as the result of coddled snowflakes.
Right, the idea that kids with overprotective helicopter parents just hadn't learned to handle the real world.
Exactly. But McDonald completely rejects that. She points out that white male students had the exact same helicopter parents, yet they aren't the ones demanding safe spaces.
So it's not a parenting issue at all. It's a deliberately constructed academic framework.
Exactly. Administrators and faculty are actively validating what McDonald calls delusional self-pity. They are prioritizing this therapeutic language of unsafety over courageous intellectual inquiry.
So the adults aren't just rolling over out of fear of a bad PR cycle.
No. Many of them are true believers who actively participate in and reward this behavior.
Now, a lot of people looking at this might say, sure, college campuses are an ideological bubble right now, but once these kids graduate, they'll hit the real world, get a corporate job, and reality will force them to grow out of it.
But according to McDonald, that is a dangerous myth. They don't grow out of it, they institutionalize it.
The author warns that the graduates of this academic victimology complex are taking these exact same behaviors and importing them directly into the corporate world.
Universities aren't just a beta testing environment for bad ideas. She argues they're the sole manufacturers of the corporate immune system. Companies outsource their HR and management training to college graduates.
Right. So if the university redesigns the white blood cells to attack traditional meritocracy as a virus, the corporate body has no choice but to start attacking itself.
We see this corporate autoimmune response perfectly illustrated in the Google incident McDonald highlights.
Oh, the James Damore memo.
Yeah. Damore, a Google software engineer, wrote an internal memo. He suggested that biological traits might partially explain the gender gap in tech. He specifically cited evolutionary psychology regarding differing average distributions in assertiveness or an orientation toward things rather than people.
And he backed this up with mainstream scientific research, right?
He did, but Google's response wasn't to debate the science. They just fired him.
Wow.
But what McDonald finds crucial is how the CEO, Sundar Pichai, justified the firing. He used the exact same therapeutic victimology language we just saw on the Yale quad.
He said the memo meant employees were hurting, didn't he?
Yes, hurting and feeling judged.
A senior engineer even claimed the memo caused significant harm. So what does this all mean? It's almost like the university was just the beta testing environment,
Yeah.
and the corporate world is now getting the full public release of this ideological software.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it's that exact same equation making the leap from the faculty lounge to Silicon Valley. Words and ideas equal literal physical harm.
But it gets even more alarming when you see how federal government agencies adopted the exact same vocabulary.
The NLRB.
Yeah. When Damar filed a complaint regarding his firing, an official advice memorandum from the National Labor Relations Board, written by a lawyer, Jamie Sofair, actually claimed that Damar's discussion of biological differences constituted sexual harassment.
This is where McDonald's warning hits its absolute peak. An official at a federal labor board ruled that simply referencing scientific research on biological differences between the sexes is inherently discriminatory and disruptive to the workplace.
That's a massive shift in legal standards.
The author argues that if this becomes the legal standard, it essentially outlaws entire fields of evolutionary biology and psychology in the corporate sphere. Meritocracy and science-based thinking are actively replaced by diversity engineering.
Which she warns will ultimately blunt America's global competitiveness.
Definitely. Which brings us to the final collision course. What happens when this newly engineered corporate and bureaucratic immune system actually attacks democratic law?
Right, the public policy clash.
McDonald points to California as patient zero for this exact conflict. In 1996, the voters of California passed Proposition 209.
That was the ballot initiative spearheaded by Ward Connerly, right?
Yes, and it legally banned race and gender preferences in government and public education. It was a very clear democratic mandate for a colorblind system.
But the bureaucratic institutions did not accept the will of the voters.
Not at all. The text details immediate, relentless, and really creative resistance from the educational elite. For example, 10 years after the ban was passed, UC Berkeley hired a vice chancellor for equity and inclusion.
And the specific purpose of this role, McDonald argues, was to circumvent the spirit of the state constitution, to find new, obscured ways to focus resources on underrepresented minority groups.
And it wasn't just passive resistance either, it was open defiance.
The Pacific Legal Foundation actually had to systematically drag government entities into court just to force them to follow the law.
Yeah, they had to sue the city of San Francisco, the State Lottery Commission, and the community college system.
These bureaucracies were practically kicking and screaming, refusing to stop using racial preferences in their hiring and contracting. This raises a massive question about institutional power. If the voters pass a law and the bureaucratic institutions essentially say drop dead, who is actually running the show?
Well, California was just the blueprint. What McDonald is showing here is a mechanism for total institutional capture. If an entrenched bureaucracy can successfully ignore a state constitution passed by the voters, it means the HR department at your company or the admissions board at your child's local school operates entirely outside the boundaries of democratic oversight.
They become a law unto themselves.
Exactly. Socially engineered racial proportionality is no longer just a policy preference. She argues it is the official, unshakable religion of the modern behemoth.
And they will defend this ideology against the law itself and against the democratic will of the people. The bureaucracy isn't broken. According to the author, it is functioning exactly as it was redesigned to function by the modern university.
So why does understanding this specific framework matter to you, the listener? Whether you are prepping for a corporate compliance meeting, navigating a college selection process with your kids, or just trying to parse the daily news cycle, you have to understand the vocabulary.
Right, because the definitions have changed.
Exactly. If you don't realize that words like safety and harm have been completely redefined by this academic ideology, you will fundamentally misinterpret modern cultural and political conflicts.
We started today by talking about the architect who suddenly decides gravity is just a subjective social construct.
We've covered a lot of ground.
We really have. We've mapped Heather McDonald's argument that this ideological shift began with discarding the Western canon. It escalated into physical campus protests where words were equated with violence, was validated by paralyzed administrators, and was finally exported to Silicon Valley and federal bureaucracies.
It's a comprehensive reshaping of institutions.
Which leaves us with a final lingering question for you to ponder. If the Enlightenment principles of objective reason, scientific inquiry, and open debate are fully replaced by subjective feelings and demographic identity as the primary metrics for truth.
What happens next?
Right. What happens to the concept of blind justice in the next generation's courtrooms or operating rooms? Will the building stand or will the foundation finally give way? Think about that.